This snowy morning, that black crow I hate so much, but he's beautiful. Hey everyone, welcome back to Solacene. This is the 4th episode in our nature semester. I opened with that little haiku from the Japanese maestro, really, Basho, because we've had some snowy mornings here ourselves. And also I think in the nature discussions we've had so far, we've talked a lot about loves, passions, and just the pleasures of being outside. We haven't talked about those irritants. Just those little, maybe villains, or maybe you've got a nemesis, a particular crow, a particular type of mosquito that always comes back for you every year. So that's what this episode's going to be about. Oh, you didn't know about that, Alicia?
I believe it because you have quite the tasty blood, as the mosquitoes tell me.
Yeah.
And they always swarm you, and if I'm out in public with you, I will have no mosquitoes. You just attract them. You are the fly repellent for
I'm
me.
like your lucky amulet that you got off some market.
Yeah, I like that poem because it suits the season very well. We've just come into a snowy season after a long fall, which I appreciated. And yeah, the idea of the irritants in nature is not what we're talking about this week, but maybe we could talk about them next week.
We should, yes.
Yeah, because there's a lot of them.
It's like you have this begrudging respect because, well, it's nature, so you can't really despise it. But at the same time, you kind of shake your fist in the air.
When you're hiking through a kind of bushy patch and then you get all those thorns scratching you and you're like, I know that I'm intruding, but why do you have to scratch me?
Or if you get stung by a hornet, wasp or bee.
Or all three, like you.
Yeah, I have completed that particular trifecta. So on today's episode, what we're going to start out by discussing is the question of bringing back extinct creatures in the Solacene. We're not really getting into the nitty-gritty, I didn't anyway, of like gene editing or whatever particular scientific advancements might allow for this, but more talking, I think, the ethics and also our own personal thoughts on it. This gets into more the science fiction of the Solacene, I suppose. But that's okay because I like talking about that, you like talking about that, and also that can also lead to rich discussions, much just like any political discussion or like, more grounded conversation can as well.
Yeah, I think so, especially because the Solacene's so far in the future that it's like post-climate change disasters, post whatever we're kind of on track for. But we know that it's going to be so far in the future that there will be a lot of advancements that perhaps right now are science fiction, but then will be reality. So it might seem silly now, but in a couple hundred years, they might be listening back to this and say,
wow, these guys were prescient. They knew what was going on. And if you want to know what's going on, listener, see how I did that? You can buy our zine. We have 3 different types, one on degrowth, one on education, and the new one called A Walk in the Wilderness, all about nature. You can follow the link in the description. Buy those. They're nice. We make them ourselves, put a lot of effort into them. And also, we have a Solacene book club. So right now, they're reading... I say they because I'm not part of that. I'm not lame like that. I don't read. The Overstory, right? That's what it's called?
Yeah, The Overstory. We are getting into part 2, but it's a very long book and it's not hard to catch up on. So if you want to join, you can send us an email. The emails are on our website and we will add you in. Thanks for the plugs, Aaron. What were your thoughts on organisms coming back to life? Because mine went surprisingly practical, but I assume yours went expectedly mythological.
Well, that's the thing. I was looking into like all the really, really cool organisms, which now we only know of as fossils and things, like from the Triassic era, just like really far away stuff. I've got some plans regarding puppetry of ancient organisms, but I kind of put my Vernian cap on, Jules Verne, that is, my new favorite author, and I was thinking about how to answer this question kind of reveals a little bit about the person. It's kind of a deep question, and also what we value as a species in terms of which organism would you like to bring back? Because it's like, do you value novelty? Do you value like maybe its use to humans? Or is it, do you just want to see something really cool? And you would think that I went for something really cool, but I tried to think of something a little bit more meaningful that could lead to some more discussion. So there were 2 organisms that I thought these would be really cool to bring back. The first one is called the Xerces blue, which were butterflies They lived in California, like on the sand dunes, and they were probably America's first butterfly species to go extinct because of habitat loss, because of humans, like urban development and stuff. But they were last seen around 1945. So not many years ago in the grand scheme of things. And there has been some potential to revive the species by like crossbreeding its cousins and stuff, which I think is kind of cool. But I also don't think that would really bring back the species, at least not in a way that I would call it. It would be kind of a new one that heavily resembles the old one, like a facsimile. And I chose this species because they're very beautiful butterflies. They have like gossamer wings. It's a very delicate shade of blue. And I just think it's the most unindustrial looking organism I could think of. Like it's the least oil sandsy type of being that I could picture. It's the least Mordor thing. And butterflies in general, they just seem like fairies to me. They seem like magical creatures, and it doesn't seem like they should be able to coexist alongside gas stations. Like it seems like the two things are just diametrically opposed, and I suppose in this instance they unfortunately could not coexist with the gas stations. But I thought we could bring these back kind of as a reminder of just the delicate splendor that is some parts of nature, which we kind of go sledgehammering our way through without much of a care for until very recently.
Yeah. I was also thinking a lot about the idea of bringing back species through not literally reviving them like in Jurassic Park, but as you said, they were doing with this butterfly, making a species through breeding and such that just really resembles it or fills the void in an ecosystem. So because ecosystems are so complex, it was hard for me to find an organism, a specific one. But I think in the Solacene, there'll be a process of bringing back organisms that went extinct that were crucial to entire ecosystems.
Okay, so you think, because I kind of skipped over the question of should we do this, you think in the Solacene we should?
I think nature will do it to an extent. However, given the current course of extinction, the rate of extinction, upwards of 100,000 species per year in the next few years, it's like we might have to step in to undo our wrongs by helping it out a little bit.
You just mean as a form of like ecosystem adjustment. Like we've had to do this. I was considering the question as in ecological issues are solved. It's the Solacene, but some species went extinct. Should we bring them back?
Okay, so you're in like the later stages of Solacene. I'm in like the first 100 years of Solacene.
Well, it's a baseline of things are fine. That kind of is what defines the Solacene.
Yeah. But anyway, I think we'll bring back species that we need. But also, I was considering the more fun ones. My first thought was that river dolphin, who used to live in rivers but recently went extinct. And I just think that was really cool. Of like dolphins who are ocean creatures living in rivers. But I was also thinking of bringing back urban reptiles. Because in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, there were turtles in the sewers. In Spider-Man, there was a lizard human.
Yes.
And I like...
You know that those weren't historical dramas.
That's why it's cool. That's why we bring it in the Solacene.
Okay.
I think
but you said bringing back.
Bringing urban reptiles.
Okay.
Bringing forth.
I think that's to do with climate. Because when we went to Mexico, there's lizards running all over the cities.
Yeah. But I like that.
So just move further south.
Yeah, you're right. But we will create cold weather reptiles.
Okay.
So they'd be like snow turtles.
Yes.
Snow snakes.
So you're actually going more fantastical than I did.
Yeah.
Talking about snow turtles.
But I just like...
Commonly known as snurtles.
I like the look of that. I know that it's not a thing, but I think it would be really cool if, you have your dogs running around, the squirrels hopping around the snow, but then also some reptiles, some green, some crispy things.
So the second organism that I thought would be good to bring back, I was thinking more, what I wrote down on this page rather melodramatically was righting our wrongs. And this is like, I wanted to do something that we like I said with the Xerxes blue, with the butterfly, we made that extinct, but it wasn't deliberate at all. Like we went hunting it. But this is the Atlas bear, which was a bear species native to North Africa. I don't think there is one anymore. It was brown. It had like a reddish underside. And it's kind of a famous story because it was hunted quite vehemently by the Romans. In the Roman Empire, as it expanded, they were hunted for sport and also to be captured and then like pitted against other animals in Rome or gladiators, and also used for there was a punishment called damnatio ad bestias, which means like, do you want to guess what it means?
Damnation by the beast.
Yeah. So they execute their criminals with these bears.
Just unleashing the animals on them.
Right.
That's.
But the Romans didn't drive them to extinction, but they heavily dwindled the species. I think the last one was seen in 1870.
Okay.
So there were firearms around at that point, and also zoos were a bigger thing. So those two plus bear equals extinction.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I definitely thought a lot about the woolly mammoth and other animals that have been hunted to extinction, the rhinoceros.
Yeah.
But
this one, the story of it just seemed so cartoonishly. I mean, the thing with it is that in ancient Rome, there wasn't that much knowledge about ecosystem collapse, biodiversity, these types of things. So they probably just saw species as almost infinite because there was so fewer people on the earth, and the bears were probably so populous at some point that it was like, who cares if we do this? Doesn't matter. Kind of like we still do with some resources today, but I think with animals, at least, we don't do that anymore. But yeah, and just some of the stories about the way they used to starve them and mistreat them to increase their desperation while they were fighting and things like that turned me into like an animal rights activist for a moment. When I was reading it, I was like, this is terrible. Actually, maybe we could talk about animal rights next week in some way.
Yeah.
Animal rights in the Solacene.
Intrinsic value of nature.
Yeah, the philosophy of that. So yeah, I just thought we could bring back the Atlas bear because many, many years ago, we kind of did them wrong.
Yeah.
So we should rewrite that.
Yeah. Speaking of animals we did wrong, this week's organism of the week is... Do you see it, Aaron?
Yes. Ashamed to say I saw it yesterday, but I didn't want to admit that. It kind of looks like a maraca almost. It's like that light shade of wood. Exactly. Hold it like that with these dark brown like ridges along its back. It's a quadruped. It has a very long tail, very straight tail also. It looks like, I'm going to guess, it's some kind of fox.
It's called the Tasmanian tiger.
Ah, okay.
It's extinct.
Did you draw this in a stylized way, or is that actually what it looked like?
This is pretty much what it looked like.
Okay.
There were photos of it because it really... The last one in captivity was 1930, so there were photos of this sweet creature.
But you guessed the color.
No, they're colorized photos.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of orangish, given the tiger name. It has stripes all down its back and tail. And it's a canid-like species. So it looks like a dog in the front half, looks like a wolf or a fox, as you said. But then it has this super hard tail. Like, it's just really rigid. Like, it doesn't move like a normal dog tail. And it just looks like some kind of Frankenstein creature. Like, the head looks just like a dog. The body is a bit more, like, confusing. And then, the tail.
You said it was in Tasmania, right?
Yeah.
So how big were they relative to
They were
humans,
only 30 pounds. So they were kind of like dog size.
Oh, they were like dogs. Okay,
Yeah.
because I was going to say, you remarked yesterday that since it's been snowing here, you notice a lot more dogs. And there are a lot of big dogs in Montreal. So I was wondering if these possibly domesticatable.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
So they were extinct in mainland Australia for like 2,000 years. So, but that's where they were native to. But some of them lived in Tasmania and New Guinea, and they survived there until the 30s. But when colonializers came to the islands, they brought dogs with them, which kind of won over in the hearts of people.
Oh.
So these guys weren't like domesticated, but they frolicked. They weren't like super violent or anything like that. But then because they were considered pests, because they're kind of close to marsupials, fun fact, they have a pouch.
Ooh.
Like kangaroos.
Yeah.
They have a little belly pouch. So they were kind of considered a pest and exterminated to extinction.
It looks like a Pokemon, I'm not going to lie. Maybe it's because of the Pikachu-esque ears that you've given it.
Yeah.
And the hard tail that I can imagine having like a 60 HP attack where it just stabs somebody like a sword.
Yeah, pretty much. Also, I lied. They're 30 kilograms.
Oh,
so
that's quite
much
a bit
bigger.
heavier,
But they're not like...
They're actually 30 tons.
They're not huge, but they're dog size.
Yeah, big dog.
Big dog. They're carnivorous. They say like mice and small creatures, things like that. And yeah, they're just really cool. Kangaroo-like, but also dog-like.
What did you call again? Tasmanian tiger?
Yeah.
Can you just leave the image there for me to look at for the rest of the episode?
Yeah, I can. They're also called the Tasmanian wolf. So.
Okay, so it's a little bit confusing, that etymology.
Mm-hmm.
Nice organisms of the week. Thank you, Tasmanian, whatever you want to be. Just to kind of close out this question, I had this quote which was from someone called Ben Mintier, who's a professor who's also wrote a book called The Fall of the Wild, and it seemed to touch on the types of things that we talk about quite a bit in Solacene, because this book kind of grapples with the types of questions like, should we bring back species that are currently extinct? He says, will we be able to maintain respect for a wild nature that we are increasingly manipulating, controlling, even attempting to recreate via genetic engineering? So the fall I'm worried about is really twofold. The loss of wild species and places in the human age, certainly, but also the fading of the wild as an ethical ideal.
Mm.
Fading of the wild as an ethical ideal, that's kind of like the subtitle for most of our episodes.
Mm-hmm.
That was a quote from an interview he did, not from the book. I'm guessing the book is written probably with a slightly more academic prose. But yeah, I was thinking about that because it's like, we're going to be, if we say we're going to bring back species and stuff, then it's just like we're shaking up a snow globe.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of we're pulling strings that maybe we should never pull.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I also had a poem that I didn't tell you. I wrote like 3 haikus for this episode.
Okay.
to go in addition to the Basho one that I opened with. So the haiku says, axe in the valley, swinging freely, then regret re-raises felled trees. Because I think that's kind of a metaphor for this type of conversation. We've been swinging our axe willy-nilly through the valley, knocking down trees left, right, and center. And then at some point we kind of look around us at all the stumps and say, oh man. And whether it's regret, whether it's just a will to see these beautiful elms back up where they should be, we start kind of hastily trying to patch them back together with hot glue or something.
Yeah, this really sounds like the book that we're reading, The Overstory. It's about a bunch of people who aren't environmentalists by any means, but they all kind of come to have that like realization that they're just standing in a cemetery of trees and that they need to do something about it, or they just don't do something about it. Makes
like
me think of that quite a bit.
A kind of collective facing of the regrets. And it's not as simple as that, because like I said with the bear, like that was a large part of the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't anything to do with you or I, or even with the butterfly. It's like we weren't real estate developers or urban planners in California in the 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to answer for their inconsideracy.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I also was thinking a bit about the ethics of bringing back species. And I feel like there's kind of this point where it's like, if you have the science, it's almost playing God to choose to not use the science. Whereas like before we had all these things developed, it's like it's playing God to try and extend people's lifespans or extend a species' existence in captivity.
Yeah.
But it's like, if we have developed it, if in the past it was chosen to not heed that kind of moral dilemma or face it, and now we have the science, so this goes into the next question really well, of like, we can all live really long because of modern medicine. So it's like, if all of a sudden we chose to just like stop giving people medicine or like stop letting people live long, that's playing
inhumane.
God, and inhumane in a way that almost worse than like definitely worse than in the first place.
Have you seen Jurassic Park? Or is it called Jurassic? Adding that to you.
I'm sorry.
I'm sure there's other people who do that.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that movie? Has Newman in? Newman.
I like Jurassic Park. I definitely always think about like...
Do you think it's a profound exploration of this topic? Or do you think it's just a blockbuster?
I'd say it's an exploration of the topic. Not profound, because it's like, what did you think was going to happen? Bringing back just these megafauna
Yes.
of dinosaurs. But I can see humans doing it and thinking, we'll just have them on this island. It'll be
sport.
fine. Yeah.
Well, I think what I was my conclusion was that it depends on the motive of the humans. If it's like, we're going to do this for amusement park, like Jurassic Park, that's a bad thing. Or if we can do it for sport, or if we can do it just to say like, hey, look at this cool leopard, let's take its skin. Or poachers have taken all the rhinos, let's bring them back so we can get more ivory or whatever it may be. That's obviously bad. But I think if we do it from a genuine, it's a humility, I think is the word for it, that mistakes were made, in large part unknowing, like I said with the Romans, like they didn't know what they were doing. And maybe even in the case of the butterfly in California, they didn't know what they were doing by just developing. But it's a kind of humility in facing those mistakes. And also, obviously, it would require like immense amount of research and cross-checking and forecasts and like a long period of study to first determine any potential impacts on ecosystems that bringing back a bear might have. Because bears, they eat a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that might skew things because ecosystems have developed in a particular way.
Yeah. These guys all of a sudden become invasive species, even if they're once native to the area.
Although I don't think that term actually is, I think, outdated.
Invasive species?
Yeah, like when we talked about ecosystems.
Oh, I remembered.
Yeah.
I remembered what it was.
Oh, for ecosystem.
Yeah, it wasn't ecosystem. That wasn't the thing that had been outdated. It was the classification of animals into fungi, animals, and plants. The way that we had been taught it.
Why? No, it's not fungi, animals, and plants. There's also like 3 different microscopic ones.
Yeah,
I think there's 6 or 7
too.
kingdoms.
But there's
Protozoa.
Yeah. But I think however we were taught it, that's the thing that has changed. It wasn't ecosystems.
Well, I don't actually remember how we were taught it.
We were taught the 3, and then they were like,
no,
and there's these other ones
I wasn't
over
taught 3. I knew there were more. I think I was taught 5 or 6.
Okay.
But it's kind of like the continents. Like everyone has a different idea of how many continents there are.
Yeah.
It's like, is Antarctica?
Is that
what is that? I still don't know. Is that just a big ice cube or something? I think it's like that with classification, but there's different theories of classification.
Exactly.
Like there might be some way of classifying it where there's only 2 kingdoms. Anyway, moving on. Next question was, how has modern medicine and living longer distanced us from various natural processes? I'll start with my haiku for this one because you already read it, I think. It says, sun and learned care given outside, given all, demedicalized. So it's kind of like demilitarized, but I didn't mean it as in moving away from modern medicine. Not that at all. It's like taking away the capital M from medicine, I think, and just changing the aesthetic of it wholly. Like keeping it what it is, but demedicalizing it so it's not called like, why does everything start with like RX? It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And a long string of numbers. I don't think that's good. But before I get into that, how did you answer this question?
I took it in that direction for sure. A bit about valuing traditional medicine, natural medicine, literal natural medicine, of just like the power of trees and flowers on our healing. But I also took it in to see the positives of living longer and modern medicine. So I think I'll start with those just to share. I think that throughout most of human history, because we were so beholden to the elements, like if it was minus 20 degrees Celsius, you had to stay indoors. You had to stay by the fire. Otherwise, you would perish.
Yes.
But because of modern medicine and science, we're not as afraid of frostbite. We're not as afraid of catching pneumonia because it can be treated for the most part where we live. Exact same in the sun. We're not as afraid of heat stroke because like even if you get dehydrated, it's not that hard to rehydrate. You can just go buy some electrolytes and be fine. And sunburns aren't as like terrifying as perhaps they maybe once were, but we should still be afraid of sunburns. But I'm just saying, like, all of these things that traditionally would have been like forced us to stay indoors or forced us to rest don't anymore, which to an extent is a good thing because we can just be outside year round.
Yeah.
And I also thought that we can witness.
And yet at the same time, we're inside a lot more. So that's the other side of it. Yeah, theoretically.
Yeah. One thing also is that we can witness changes in a way that we didn't used to. Like when a lifespan was like 60 years, you wouldn't witness the changes of your environment as much. So it's like you'd live a lifetime. And now we kind of have those extra few years on the other end where it's like you can see a tree literally go from a sapling to like a full-on tree. I don't know. It's just like, I feel like that's also kind of a benefit. It's kind of cool.
We're going to be alive to see the widespread adoption of the metaverse.
Woo!
It's exciting. Terrifying. Yeah, I kind of split this question into two things. Like, it changes our perception and it changes the actual events which, actually happen, like that form our lives. And with perception, I was thinking, like, COVID came to mind immediately because that's such a big and recent health thing, vaccine skepticism and things like that. And I know that's been around for centuries, whatever. Like, people skeptical of doctors, medicine, like, oh, I don't trust that kind of science. But I really think the very recent, in the grand scheme, like sterile, hyper sanitized image of like scientists in lab coats and test tubes and beeping computers being a hospital, or like being the place that medicine is developed. I don't think people like that. I don't like that. Even like, I know it's the case, and I know that objectively that's the best way to heal people and things, but it's not. I mean, people don't like it. Like, it's empirical. You can see that people prefer the more natural image.
Yeah.
Because that is the word that come to mind. It would be like, that's unnatural. And I know that like everything that we do is unnatural per se. Like, let's say you make some blend of like herbs to heal someone and put over a wound. That's still unnatural because you are making it. It's much closer in steps to nature, rather than being ground down, specific compounds isolated and then merged in a laboratory and other things formed. It reminds me a little bit of when I was in school. I remember in elementary school, someone came around to talk about food, talk about health, and she said, when you're reading the ingredients on food that you see at the grocery store, if you can't pronounce anything, it's probably bad for you. And it's like, that's not really true, but aesthetically, that's how people think. And it's not like a value judgment that people should or shouldn't think like that. That's just how they think.
Yeah.
How we think.
I think that's why we're drawn to diets like the raw food diet or things, because it's just like,
there's a massive swing in the other direction. You can see it. And what annoys me is that people look at those kind of things. They're like, oh, these nut jobs with their crystals and like eating so much liver, but you can see like very clearly where it comes from.
Like, it might not actually be good for you, but it's easy. Like, it's not hard on the head. Whereas if you're trying to shop at a grocery store in like the processed food aisle, like, you would burn more calories looking at the labels than eating the actual food.
And there's also the thing that it's like perception matters a lot, because if someone, placebo, like, that's proven that is a huge part of your health. Like, if someone goes into the vaccine thinking this is going to kill me because it's, a conspiracy or whatever, then it's more likely that they will have some side effects versus someone who's just like, yeah, it's a vaccine, it's good for me.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Our minds have a lot of power. I'm reading The Body Keeps the Score right now for another book club, and it's this man's life's work, and he's talking about his time as a psychiatrist working in different psychiatric positions throughout his career. He began in like the early 70s, so medicine then was much different than it is now. And so he talks about the move from the hospitals would have gymnasiums, they'd have pools where the patients and the doctors would all like literally just play games together. And he's like, but with the dawn in the 80s of the drug revolution of like finding all of these drugs to help with psychiatric conditions, they literally paved over the pools, paved over the gyms, and put cubicles for people to give out prescriptions. And he was like, I saw that, like, yes, the drugs are doing good, but the loss of the gyms and stuff, like, it really broke down the actual healing, like the healing of the trauma.
Yeah, because hospitals are such depressing places to be. What the other side of what you said earlier about theoretically we can live more recklessly and still have faith in medicine that, it doesn't matter if we get a sunburn or whatever. I see that more as a negative because people don't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And such simple things as sunlight, exercise, getting proper sleep, eating well. It's like, well, it's fine. I can just medicalize, which is not good. And that's why it's kind of like when I criticize the idea of walking shoes on the podcast, it's like every shoe should be a walking shoe. That's what I think about the term preventative care. It's like that should just be called living.
Yeah.
That should just be taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that should be going to the doctor of like, oh, how can I avoid this and this and this?
No one ever goes to the doctor to strengthen themselves.
No. To try and heal. I have a lot of thoughts about doctors, so I shouldn't get into
Maybe
that.
we'll do a medical series at some point.
Yeah,
but this is
maybe.
more about our relationship to nature. So the second thing that I want to talk about was the events that actually happen and like our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
This is that first observation, many people very rarely see blood.
It's true.
Whereas historically, like you'd be seeing blood all over the place. And so we're a lot more squeamish. We never see death. We never see dead animals. Like people are very squeamish about seeing like a chicken hanging up or something.
Mm-hmm.
You are anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably would be as well. It's like, I watched this interview, I don't know why, with Billie Eilish, right? Musician, popular Gen Z pop singer, old pop maybe, I don't know. And on one of her album covers, it's like a close-up of her crying. And it's like, okay, it's an artsy photo shoot, and she has like a tear running down her face. And the interviewer said, how did you what was the story behind that? And she said, yeah, we were just in the photo shoot, and the person behind the camera asked me to cry, but I couldn't. So I said, pull up an image of Spirit, the horse, from the DreamWorks animated movie, right? Because Spirit, I'm guessing the horse dies at the end or something like that. And that made her cry. And I was like, she's probably, I don't know, a late teenager or early 20s. And that's the saddest thing that she can think of.
Yeah.
I feel like that's for most people, because we're so, in the West anyway, we're so insulated, and we experience death and hardship so much later in life now, in part because of medical advancements, that I'm not romanticizing the past where people were always dying. Obviously that's not good. I talked about that in the previous episode, that we shouldn't romanticize the distant past for anything, because that wasn't good. But we have lost these various things that we should acknowledge and in some other way try to replicate, I think, so we don't all just become DreamWorks watching tearless, I don't know, blobs.
I think Billie Eilish is a pretty staunch vegan as well, so she probably has quite the empathy.
Well, I didn't know
animals.
that context, but it's an animated horse anyway, so
it is an animated horse.
But I was thinking, because of this, do we fear death? Because that's like the ultimate natural process, less now, or do we fear it more now? Because another example I was watching a movie that was set in medieval times, and there was a couple who were having a baby, and it was a miscarriage. It was a stillborn. And I was watching, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a really sad movie. But they just kind of went, like they just kind of sighed and then moved on, because that was so normal. Like kids, like infant mortality, it was so different, and they had such a different perspective on just life and death in general. So it wasn't the absolute saddest thing that would crush them for years, like it perhaps would if that happened today.
Yeah, and it's understandable that it crushes people today, but I think what we're talking about in the Solacene is the natural life and death cycle of just like creatures, of pets, of things in nature. And I think having an attunement to those things will strengthen us to be better equipped to deal with the big losses in our life. So it's like, oh, you've seen the neighborhood crow, its lifespan's like 7 years or something. You see it die and you kind of mourn it on a small scale, and you build up resilience. And it's not that I want everyone to be cold, but it's like we want a resilient community.
Yeah, I'm not, like I said, it's not a value judgment. I'm just saying this has changed very, very drastically, and I think quite quickly.
Yeah.
Another example I had was food. Like you and I have probably never missed a meal. Certainly not 2 in a row. And it's like that's true for a lot of young people now, or people in our position. And so we don't really know hunger, which, like that's a very natural thing as well.
Yeah.
And also, it's like we never see violence, which is a key part of the natural world. So it's like we don't know that either. Like it's just a very insulated kind of domestic world that we have now. Yeah. So in terms of what was the question? It's like, how has that changed our
how does it distance us from natural processes? But I think that's kind of answering it.
It has.
Yeah.
It has distanced us.
Yeah. For sure. I have a lot of thoughts. I was listening to a podcast about this hunger experiment that I'd never heard of. It took place in the 40s, like right after World War II, somewhere around World War II. And it was literally just 36 men being starved for like 6 months and being studied. And it's like obviously the ethics of that would never, like, you couldn't do that today because it
whatever.
scarred them for life. But it was just like listening to their experiences, because there's recordings of them later in life reflecting on it. It's like literally 60 years after it happened, them telling about it, and just hearing them talk about their experience with true hunger made me just like, it ruined my day. And it's, as you were saying, the sensitivity, it's just like, I don't know, it's crazy how distant we are from these
Well, this is why
things.
I think, like, that's not a good thing. Like, it's not, it is good that humans can always eat now. Like, that's a lot of humans, should I say. But it's in a way bad that we don't know those elements of the human condition. And anyway, if for nothing else, because we can't properly relate to genuine hungry people that there are today, a lot of them. So that's why I think, like, I don't know, a fast, like a 36-hour or 2-day fast or something, if that was like a nationwide holiday, like it sounds very depressing, because, even in Canada, there are also a lot of people who can't eat. Like, some optional way of undertaking a hardship like that, I just think would be good for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. Just like camping for 2 weeks. Like, just doing things.
I mean, even you're going to camp in your RV and watch DVDs and.
I mean, like, go off.
Oh no,
I
ran out of gluten-free marshmallow crackers.
You choosing hardship, cold showers.
Cold shower, you expose yourself a little bit every day.
Yeah.
Builds up your tolerance. But even that is like, that's just nothing.
Yeah. It's no actual threat. I had something interesting about the effect of nature on our healing, because we've so distanced ourselves. I've been thinking a lot about hospitals, and this is a study that was done on if there's flowers in a patient's room, will they need as much pain medication? And it says no. Like, if you have flowers in your room, you need less pain medication.
Yeah.
So, like, think about if the hospital wasn't a cube. Like, if it had a window or if it had fresh air, like, they'd need far less pain medication because our bodies release good hormones when we're in nature. And it's like, if we were choosing to preventatively go into nature and build up our joy levels, like fill our cup, then when we are faced with something challenging, we'd be less likely to falter and then have like a week of recovery.
We'd get sick less.
That's
definitely
well put. Yeah. I was also thinking that because we live so long on average, it's like you have obviously your connection to nature as a child. Like, most people from age like 0 to 7 love nature. Like, they're not as obsessed with video games yet. It's still their favorite thing to do would be to be allowed to go and climb a tree or sled down a hill. And then you get into adolescence and young adulthood, and you kind of get preoccupied with like your job and your family and adventures, whatever you're doing. But then you say, oh, I'll move to the countryside when I'm older or when I retire. And then you keep putting it off, and you kind of lose that lust for nature. And then when you do retire at age 60, it's like, well, I don't really like nature that much.
You don't start rolling down hills anymore or sledding? Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think we will. So we need to choose to do it in the now, because the now is all we have.
Whoa, look at that. Do you think, like, people say that living so long is somewhat unnatural? What do you think about the proposed idea to like upload your consciousness into a robot and live forever?
I don't love that.
No, why not?
I don't love that.
You don't think it's Solacene?
I don't think it's Solacene.
Because I think death is crucial.
I think death is an important motivator.
It's the most important thing about life.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we should be striving for like well-being longer, like a longevity that's not just for the sake of being long, it's for living well. So it's like, yeah, we've kind of nailed down the living long. Even if we were able to upload our consciousness, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a happy consciousness.
Even if it were happy, though, do you think it would be good?
No.
I just have an aesthetic wrongness with it.
Yeah.
It's a religious aversion that I have to it almost. Anyway, the third question for today was regarding the appropriate levels of pollution in the Solacene. So we're jumping around a little bit.
Yeah.
And how to maintain those, make sure they're not exceeded in the Solacene. So pollution, definition, the presence or introduction of a substance to the environment that has harmful or poisonous effects So there's pollution in the sense of like, oh, all this gross particulate matter and smog in the big city makes it hard to breathe. So the air pollution levels stay really high. I have to wear my mask, that kind of thing. But I just kind of, and I think you do as well, we use it as a very general term for anything bad that we put into the environment as a result of human activity, let's say. Not even just industrial activity, but just breathing. Maybe that's a pollutant in some senses. So like emissions, we're counting that.
Ocean acidification,
we're counting that. Microplastics, counting that. And I really set about answering the question kind of using numbers. I was like, I want to know when were things fine. Like, we've always polluted, we know this, but the earth can absorb quite a lot of this. So my haiku for this question was, I, the earth, absorb plumes of industry and make blooms of purity. Because it's just this nice resilience and transformative power that nature has, which is very wonderful. You know, we don't have to be perfect at all. We can be quite a bit bad and things are still 100% fine. We just can't be very bad, you know, with like billions and billions of people. But I realized that the question of how much pollution is possible without making too many long-term adverse effects is not really answerable, because that definition of pollution we use is so wide, and it being such a global issue, because emissions, obviously that's a global thing, but in some senses it's the question just requires many localized answers. You know, it's like, how much of a certain type of pollution can this one river take? Or how much fertilizer, you know, year after year, can the soil take? You know what I mean? So you can't really put numbers on it for the whole world, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was trying to remember, and then I just did before we recorded, what it's called the 9 planetary boundaries. And those are 9 planet-wide thresholds that we have to try to avoid crossing, because if they're within the boundaries, it's fine. It's like humans at any level, if we were emitting this much.
The oceans can sequester it. It's all fine. It's all dandy. Yeah,
the fungi can break it down, the whatever. And so these 9 are, I'm going to start with the 2 that aren't measured yet. So there's 2. One is novel entities. So that's like new things that we think up to pollute the planet with.
In the ozone layer.
Yeah, and then the other one is CFCs, like atmospheric aerosol levels.
Yeah.
So it's like that's obviously changes quite a bit because we've been dealing with it for so long. So those 2 haven't been measured. But those are 2 boundaries that we don't want to
exceed.
And then the next 2 that are currently within the safe zone.
Oh.
So good for us. We have 3 within the safe zone is stratospheric ozone depletion. Yeah. So that's like messing with the ozone layer.
We fixed it.
I think it's getting worse again.
We fixed it.
Ocean acidification. So that's really close.
Yeah.
And then
that's gonna go.
Freshwater use. So that's polluting rivers, but also messing with the cycles of like freshwater cycles.
Groundwater pollution as well is a big thing.
And then 2 things that were in the unknown zone. So it's like
it's like a sonic level.
So it's like we have crossed the boundaries. Like it's not good.
Yeah.
But it's not irreversible.
Yeah.
Is with climate change. So that is the manual changing of the climates, like deforestation and obviously greenhouse gas emissions. And the other one is land system change. So that's more the like disturbing how we use land. So breaking it up with highways or, again, deforestation. So these 2 are really close, but I think climate change is a bit more the whole system than land is just like the land system. So those 2 are at a point where it's like we probably could fix it, but it would take a lot of change. Like we've crossed the boundaries. And the 2 that are high risk, so like off the charts levels of messed up, are biosphere integrity. So that means species extinction.
Yeah.
Like we've just killed too many species. Like it's really messed up. Those aren't going to recover naturally kind of thing. Or with even a lot of help, like it's always going to be changed. And the final one is biogeochemical flows. So that's the flow of, like, we've disturbed it with fertilizers and
nitrogen cycle.
Yeah,
The cycles.
phosphorus cycles, all those things.
Okay.
So those two are kind of beyond repair. Like they won't go back to normal.
Nice.
But if you want to look more into this, you can look up the Stockholm Resilience Center, and they explain kind of the actual like what we should be striving for, what the planet can sustain, and not just like sustain. It's working, like everything's fine,
Yes.
but like actually, like we are all thriving if we stay within these boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Right. So how in the Solacene do you think we stay within these boundaries?
I just said we don't emit anything. Like everything's as circular as humanly possible.
Yeah, but you were talking about greenhouse gases, let's say.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the chart, I think, like the last time greenhouse gases per capita were okay, was in like the 40s, the 1930s and 40s. So I think like that might be wrong, but like there is a time, probably in the last 100, maybe in the last 150 years, that was just before it became like that's too much for greenhouse gases, but also for everything. So it's like, I just think if scientists figured that out and said, okay, we need to get back to X year levels, then I think that's like good messaging. Because then people at the protest could hold up a sign that says like 1923, and it's like that's the year that you need to go back to. But the question of how people in the Solacene stick to it is relevant because today a lot of companies know and governments know how much we should be pouring into a river, let's say, but we exceed it anyway. So I think like it's a boring answer, but strong regulation, strong penalties, but also hopefully in the Solacene people won't want to. Like people will have a strong aversion to polluting because we've learned from a young age the actual effects. Like I never actually learned in middle school or high school, and certainly not elementary school, what happens when you put a bunch of a bad thing in a river or in the water.
Yeah, they just said it was bad, but you didn't
no,
really have
we never talked about it.
Really?
No, what class would that have been talked to?
Yeah, that's a good point. We always had our annual trips to the dump where they'd tell us about these things. Not everyone had that privilege.
Yeah.
Going to the dump every year. But yeah, just telling them from a young age. But I was thinking, as you said with the policy and regulation, like I think that'll always be necessary because there'd be the one person who went rogue.
Yeah, it'd be more than one person because everyone's trying to get financial edge.
Yeah.
But I remember in one of my first environmental science university courses, everyone was so bright-eyed and excited. And then the professor kind of quieted the room and she asked, so what level of like pollution would you want? And everyone was like, none. But she was like, but some though. Like you can pour some toxic waste into a river and have it be perfectly fine long term. So it's just about finding that number. And I feel like that concept hasn't been explained to people very well. That's like a good amount of pollution is just completely fine.
It's almost
depending
more
on what
attainable.
it is. Like plastics in the ocean, that would be best if there was nothing. Or like the heavy metal, contamination of like the food chains in the ocean and things like that. Like those are just bad. But like the common pollutants, those are fine to an extent.
Like if there's some cows.
You mean with methane?
With methane, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Humans are always going to excrete CO2.
So do plants.
So do plants.
In the evenings. Can we come up with another question for next week so we don't have to do it off air again?
Yeah. What's a good question?
Something along the lines of science and nature and pollution and technologies. Emissions. Yeah.
Climate change.
CO3? No. CO2.
I know.
Okay.
What if we talk about the different biases that we assume people have when it comes to nature? Like, I know that there's a few, but I can't remember them. So it's like, what are these biases that we have? So it's like, we assume people will, if they had the chance, they'd cut down the tree to make the lumber to sell. But in reality, that's not actually the case.
Okay.
Like, people are nicer than we give them credit for.
Sure.
So if we talk about those types of things.
I have no idea what that is. It sounds kind of psychological, but okay, let's talk about that.
Okay.
And with that being said, Thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you next week.